Alright folks, welcome back. We are up to now topic 4.6. It's still a market revolution just like 4.5, but this time around we're going to look more at society and culture, see what's going on in terms of social changes, migration patterns, and also immigration. So we're going to focus on this question: how did American society change during the market revolution? And let's begin by looking at migration and settlement patterns. So we've been talking about this quite a bit, really, since the beginning of this course. Americans are heading west, and more in the early 1800s are moving west of the Appalachians. Many of them are establishing or moving to communities that are popping up along the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, and of course their tributaries, like say the Tennessee River or the Cumberland River or wherever. And so you have these little towns popping up, and they're thriving because of their connection to the river. They can export their goods down the river to New Orleans and then out across the world. The steamboat here, we talked about this not too long ago, is going to be a key ingredient in this expansion and settlement. If you look historically, you'll notice that they're sort of the center of American population has been progressively moving west, and that is a trend that will probably continue into the future. Now, we're also going to see not just a movement of Americans west, but also movement of people to America, specifically immigrants from Europe. And many of them are going to be moving into northern cities, which are industrial, which of course has a need for a labor force that those immigrants can supply. And so we're going to look at two immigrant groups here, and both of them are going to have a big impact on American history. And they're going to be coming over in large numbers in the mid-1800s. So our first group of note would be the Irish. And as you have learned, I'm sure, in other classes, there's a reason that a lot of Irish are heading to America in the 1840s, or at least leaving Ireland altogether. And that, of course, is a reference to the famous potato famine. So in the 1840s, there's this terrible failure of the potato crop. Potato blight strikes, and it is just absolutely devastating. About 1 million or so Irish are going to die. Millions more are going to flee Ireland, many of them coming to America, but also going to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, other places around the world. And this is just absolutely devastating for the Irish. In fact, if you look at the population of Ireland over time, these are, of course, estimates, you can see that the population of Ireland reached about 9 million, and then it's going to drop precipitously after the famine. And honestly, even today, there are fewer Irish people living in Ireland in current year than there were before the famine. All right, so Irish, as they arrive in America, many of them are desperately poor. They don't have the resources to move past those initial cities they land in, so they might settle in Boston or Philadelphia or New York or someplace like that, and that's kind of where they're going to be staying for generations, if not to the present day. They just kind of get stuck on the East Coast. Now, the Irish do not exactly get a warm welcome in the United States. Many of them are poor, as we just said. Many of them living in these crowded, dingy slums. They're bringing with them Catholicism, which was seen as a threat by the majority of Americans who are Protestant. Many of them are, they don't have a lot of skills, and so they're doing just kind of physical manual labor. And because they're starting at the bottom of the economic ladder, they're also in competition with the free black population of the North, which is going to lead to a lot of tension. And that's something we're going to come back and revisit later. And that's going to result in some pretty awful violence during the Civil War in New York. There's also, of course, the issue of Irish stereotypes, that Irish people are kind of drunken and rowdy people, which, of course, Irish are no different than anybody else. But that's the stereotype that's going to hold, and people are going to hold that against Irish immigrants. You can see this this example of that kind of anti-Irish propaganda. On the left, we've got this very proper British woman, Florence Nightingale, contrasted with this sort of just monstrous Irish woman, right? As if there's something completely different. They're almost not even on the same level as the British, is what this propaganda is trying to convince us. And so this gives rise to notices in newspapers and in signs in stores and stuff about no Irish need apply. We don't need Irish people around here. We don't want Irish people in our employ. All right, so our second immigrant group is going to be the Germans. There's a couple of reasons why they're heading over here. Like the Irish, they are facing some economic hardship back home. Nothing to the extent of the Irish potato famine, but still. This is partly just the reality of Europe, that they have a very large population condensed into a small area. And, the idea of moving to a large country has all kinds of opportunities is very appealing. Plus, in 1848, there are going to be a series of revolutions across the German states, and most of these revolutions are going to fail, and so some of these revolutionaries are either fleeing for their lives or just hoping to go somewhere else. They've kind of given up on Germany. And so they arrive in America. They tended to be wealthier and more skilled than the Irish. So therefore, while some of them certainly will settle in these eastern cities as they arrive across the Atlantic, many more are going to head west. They might take, a steamship down the rivers, and they might settle in, St. Louis or Cincinnati. There was a very large German population in Cincinnati, but all across the Midwest is kind of where your German population is going to be concentrated. A lot of them are farmers, and this is great farmland out here. And as a result, German ancestry is one of the largest in America today. There's a good chunk of Americans who can trace their ancestry back to Germany. You can still see, even in modern days, that concentration of Germans in the Midwest, particularly the upper Midwest. All right, now let's get back to the economy and talk industrialization now. And what we're going to see is that and manufacturing is rising, and we're seeing an increase in prosperity and standards of living for some. Now, obviously not everyone's doing better, but a lot of Americans are doing better because of all these new technological advancements and just overall improvements in the economy. What we're going to see during this time are social classes beginning to emerge. At the top, of course, you have a small but very wealthy business elite. These are people, many of whom got wealthy in opening a new factory or railroad or mine or something industrial-based. And they're kind of, they're small number, but they have a lot of power, a lot of influence. Beneath them would be a middle class. And this middle class is, of course, as the name implies, not rich. They're also not poor. They live comfortable lives. They might have a servant or two at home to help them with their daily routine. They live usually in a comfortable home in a nice area of town. And these are people who might work in, say, some sort of like management role or supervisory role in a factory or some other business. So this is not the working poor, of course. But they're also not the rich elite. They're somewhere right in the middle. Their kids have access to education. Their kids are going to school. And it's just a very different world from the next group, the working poor. So the working poor, as the name implies, are the people at the very bottom of society whose physical labor is their only hope of surviving. And a sickness or an injury at work could prove devastating for the entire family. These people are always on the very edge of ruin. They're often living in small apartments, or sometimes multiple families sharing the same dwelling, just trying to scrape by. All right, let's now look at some shifting work patterns. So the old model of the economy worked kind of this way, where the overwhelming population of America was agricultural, and they lived in rural areas. They tend to be self-sufficient. In other words, they raise the crops they need to survive on. They build their own homes. They make their own clothes. Very little in the way of mechanization. Honestly, the technology they were using was not much more advanced than had been used in the Middle Ages. So this was, again, the established pattern. But with the market revolution, things are definitely changing. More and more people are moving to the cities to seek jobs in the factories, so we have an increasingly large industrial working class. And now instead of subsistence farming, we have people working for a wage. So your physical labor, it translates into money, and money you use to buy the necessities for life, as opposed to making those necessities yourself. So a really big shift in the economy during the market revolution. All right, we're going to look now at some societal patterns, see what's going on there. And like our last topic, there's kind of an old and new model. So in the old model, men and women tended to kind of work side by side to tend to the farm and survive and assist with all the daily chores, of which there were countless ones on the farm. I mean, farm labor was backbreaking labor all day, every day. And so men and women certainly sometimes had certain jobs that one or the other did, but in general, it was kind of a team effort where they're working as a unit to survive. In the new model, though, things are changing. Particularly in the middle class and definitely the upper class, men are the ones who are working outside the home, whereas women are staying at home and tending to the family, tending to the home itself. This model doesn't work as well for the laboring poor, because many poor women are also working as well as the men. But where the economics allow for it, you would see this model where men tend to be outside the home, women tend to be in the home. Now, going along with that idea is this thing called the cult of domesticity. So if you recall, shortly after the revolution, we looked at this thing called Republican motherhood, where women had this special elevated place in the republic as the teachers of the young, as the molders and shapers of the new generation to be patriotic, virtuous Republican citizens. Well, that is shifting into this thing called the cult of domesticity, where still women are seen as the moral compass of the family and the guiding light of the family, but it's a glorification of that traditional role for women in the home. And so any shift away from this, of course, is seen as negative for the middle class and upper class. Women are supposed to be at home. They're not supposed to be working outside the home, unless they're doing, say, volunteer work at a local church or something. That's about it, but not earning wages. That was scandalous, because men earned the wages. Women stayed at home. All right, so that is our look at the market revolution. We talked about some big societal changes. We looked at immigration patterns, settlement patterns, the Germans, the Irish. We looked at some new and old economic models in terms of who's working, where they're working, what their job is. We looked at different social classes that were created during this time period. So a lot of information, guys. And just like in our last video, what we're really focusing on is this shift away from the old way of doing things to a more modern and frankly more recognizable view from our perspective in the modern day.